Dunu Vulkan, yes, a new IEM from Dunu themselves. Today we'll be reviewing this IEM and comparing it to its competitors, the Blessing 2 Dust and the Monarch T2. Stay tuned. Hey friends, Tim here, back with another video on Giz Audio, and today we have the Dunu Vulkan. And yes, Dunu, you guys know them already for the Titan S and SA6, both fantastic options for their respective price ranges. I especially love the SA6. It's one of my most favorite IEMs in the mid-fi, around $400–500 range. Now, the Vulkan coming in at $380. How does this fare on the market? Let's first discuss the sound signature. Now, the tuning on the Vulkan can be described as unconventional, unique if you will, especially within its price point. This is the only IEM that has this kind of tuning. But yes, it is an unconventional style of tuning that in this case actually works well. Let's start off with the bass. The bass here, we have a sub-bass focus signature leading down to a rather modest mid-bass. So for those of you who love thumps and slam and mid-bass that's in your face, you're a bass head, this is not gonna really do it for you. It does have clean bass, however, so there's very little bleeding or influence to a lower mid-range. It adds just a touch of warmth, but not distasteful in any way at all. In terms of dynamics, the texture of the bass, how does it do? For me, it's not the most meatiest or textured bass out there. There's not a lot of details to be found in the bass. It's just well controlled, and that's pretty much it. On to the mid-range, and this is where the unconventional part comes in. Starting from the lower mids to around the upper mid-range area is relatively normal, kind of flat, until you get to that upper mid-range area where a lot of other IEMs tend to elevate quite a bit to give instruments and vocalists that bit of contrast or that forwardness that gives it a more true to life feeling. But in the Vulkan, it is toned way down. It has a more tamer signature with somewhat of an even display of the upper mid-range frequency altogether. Nothing is really jumping up as the highlights. And what that does is it gives the IEM a more transparent presentation, not a contrasty one, but more transparent, even presentation across the board. The one thing that makes it not completely flat or completely even is the treble area. Now in the treble area, there's a highlight around the 6 to 8K region that brings up a bit of nuances in the song, some micro details or a little bit of highlights for the female vocals or instruments that lives in this octave. And I would say that is the region that's gonna be the most forward for you as you listen to the Vulkan female vocals, and any instruments that lives a little bit higher, those are gonna come across a bit more lively than the other ranges. So lower instruments like cellos, male vocals, or any deeper female vocals, those are gonna come across a little bit in the backseat. Just a select few vocalists are gonna shine a bit more. Vocalists like Ariana Grande. So if you imagine Ariana Grande and anyone that sings roughly in her range, those girls or anyone in that range is gonna be slightly bit more poppy and slightly bit more lively than the rest of everybody else. Now after the 8K Hz, the treble does drop quite a bit, creating a sense of unevenness overall. The one saving grace though is that it does have some sense of air towards the end, 15K and up. It does have some sense of air, which is nice. Okay, that was quite a bit about the tuning section. It's quite difficult to explain this tuning to a lot of people because it is not a style that everyone is gonna be used to, but for me, overall, it works really well, and it's one IEM that I suggest you try out if you want to try something new, something refreshing that actually sounds good. Because let's face it, there's a lot of new tuning or unconventional tuning that absolutely is garbage. So the Dunu Vulkan is not one of those. I highly urge you try it for yourself to get the sense of what I'm trying to convey here. Now on to the technical performance, starting with the details. Now the details on the Vulkan, man, if you really break it down, it has some great qualities and it has some just meh qualities. So here's my scale. I'm gonna give it an overall score of just below the timeless. It's not quite the timeless. There's depth that's missing in the Vulkan. It's more wide in nature. There's spaciousness in the air, and it does portray some micro details well, but that lack of depth, that lack of instrumental layering, that part hinders the overall detail performance of the IEM. by quite a bit, unfortunately. Everything else about the details is on the decent to good side, and some even fantastic. The good qualities about this is that the instrumental separation is generally alright. It's not bad, it's not pinpoint, the imaging is not like clean, clear cut or anything like that, but all in all it's nicely placed, just again lacking that depth. So everything feels like they're on one line on the stage, if you will. Speaking of stage, that is the best part about the Vulkan. This thing has wide stage, wide, satisfying feeling stage with good sense of air. It is a chef's kiss level of soundstage. For the price, I would say this probably has the best stage in terms of width, the wideness of it. I wish it had that depth to really bring in the full 3D effect. Unfortunately, that is the biggest Achilles heel of this IM. If it had that, I would recommend this IM wholeheartedly, really highly, but since it lacked that depth, it kind of feels incomplete in a way, but nevertheless, the stage is impressive. Now on to comparison, let's first do the Vulkan versus the Mangur T. Now the Vulkan and Mangur T could not be more different of an IM. The only similarity they have is maybe in their bass power. The Mangur T is also sub-bass focused with a modest mid-bass, not a lot of thumps, similar to the Vulkan. The mid-range is entirely different. The Mangur T has a more conventional mid-range where the upper mid has some form of energy. It's not the most energetic or lively upper mid-range, but it has more than the Vulkan nonetheless. The treble on the Mangur T is also, I would say, more even but more tamed than the Vulkan in general. There's not a lot of micro nuances being highlighted in the Mangur T2 as opposed to the Vulkan that does highlight those elements. The detail retrieval though, I would say the Vulkan wins in detail retrieval. Instrumental separation is slightly bit better. In terms of soundstage, the Vulkan just wins. Flat out beats the Mangur T2. The Mangur T2 has this, I wouldn't say congested feeling, but it doesn't feel as open, not nearly as open as the Vulkan does. If you want something that's more natural, more true to life, you go for the Mangur T2. If you want something that's more unconventional, then the Vulkan is gonna be your choice. The Mangur T2 is a much safer choice for sure for the money. The Vulkan, you're gonna have to kind of take a gamble on whether or not you're gonna like this style of tuning that probably most people have never even tried. Now for the Blessing to Dust comparison, similar stories in the upper mid range. The Dust has more natural, lively vocals, lively upper mids that's more true to life and forward than the Vulkan. In the bass, the Dust also feels more thumpy, more dynamic as well. In the treble area, there are even more differences. The Dust has treble extension, but not the best treble extension out there. The Vulkan has a highlighted treble, some peaks, some unevenness. So overall tuning style, you really just can't pick two more different sounding IEM. And in terms of detail retrieval, this is where the Dust flat out destroys the Vulkan. The Dust has decently wide stage, not as wide as the Vulkan, but it has depth, it has layering, it has really good pinpoint accuracy imaging that the Vulkan simply just can't compete with. The saving grace for the Vulkan here again is going to be the soundstage. The Vulkan is wider, but I would say at this point the Dust just has way too many good things over the Vulkan. A little bit of lacking in soundstage of the Dust does not make the Vulkan more appealing when it comes to the detail aspect anyways. The Dust is just a superior IEM in details in general. So yeah, you might be asking, why would you pick the Vulkan over the Dust? And the answer to that is tuning. Yes, the Dust has again a more conventional style of tuning that's more natural with good energy in the upper mids and good bass, relatively clean mid-range. So that style of tuning you probably heard before in some other IEMs. The Dust does it fantastically well. It's probably one of the best IEMs to do it, but the Vulkan is something different. And that brings me to my overall conclusion of the Vulkan. I would say the Vulkan is a good IEM, really nice. It has a lot of great qualities. It has some big downsides as well. But the best part about it is that it stands out from the market due to its tuning. And that's where it kind of sits. The selling point here for the Vulkan is simply that if you want to try something that's not of the norm, that is not conventional, then the Vulkan is a good choice. It has a lot of good points, it has some bad points to it, but all in all, it is a unique IM for the price point that, in my personal opinion, you should try out at least once.
君が笑うだけで